Now that everyone's warmed up with a few jokes, hello, panelists. How are you?
Good.
Good, thank you.
And everyone's settled down from lunch. Yes, it's very nice to see everyone, and I'm very excited to be back at the App Promotion Summit again today. Actually, this is where I did my first ever talk 6 years ago, so it's really nice to be back. Rosie's shocked. We've got our amazing panelists here today. I'm very excited to be joined by these industry legends. And before we start, I know Steve has just introduced me, but I'll introduce myself again. I'm Hannah Parvaz. After working in the mobile app space for more than a decade, I have recently spun out a new full-service growth agency called Aperture. So one of the things that we all spoke about and decided together whenever we were prepping for this was that we wanted to go extremely deep in this conversation. So a lot of real life examples, a lot of real world current active strategies are coming out here in these conversations today. And I know that you're very excited to get to the juicy bits now. So without further ado, I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves. So can you start with who you are, where you work, what you work on, and because we love a bit of fun, if you could tell me one app that you would use, if you could only use one app for the rest of your life, which app would that be and why? So I'll start with Léa.
Thank you, Hannah. Great, so I'm Léa Samrani, if you want to find me on LinkedIn, that's who I am. I'm currently leading the product function at Uptime, which is an education app where we do book courses, podcasts, and documentary summaries in what we call 5 minutes hacks. Very visual, very cool, check it out. And I've also been working for the last few years with about a dozen apps where I help them with their product growth function. As per the product that I would use, so it's not a choice product, it's not a product I love, but it's a necessity. My husband makes fun of me all the time because I get lost in my own street. I never know where I am. I don't think I would have been able to come today here from the station, the tube station, to here without Google Maps. So here we go. I would use Google Maps.
Thank you, Léa. Tanya?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya, and I've been with Laundry Heap for 6 years. I manage their digital channels and formulate strategies to drive online user acquisition and retention for the service. For those who are not familiar with the brand, Laundry Heap is an on-demand laundry and dry cleaning service. So we collect your clothes, process them, and deliver it back to you in 24 hours. So if anyone here does not want to do laundry ever again, check it out.
Who does?
Okay, and one app that I cannot do without, it would be Instagram. It's like a one-stop shop for all my app needs. I can connect with anyone and everyone, with businesses, with people. It provides me with entertainment. I can even use it as a search engine sometimes. So yeah, that's me.
Perfect. And last but not least, Moshe?
Hey everyone, Moshe Demri, I'm the VP Revenue at Optimove. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a marketing automation platform, and we help mobile-first brands to basically improve their retention and better communicate with their customers. I have a good one, actually. I don't know if for the rest of my life, but definitely nowadays, there's an app called Family. Probably everyone who has kids in nursery has it, which basically it's an app that helps you to spy and see what your kids are doing in the nursery. So literally when they poo, what they eat, how long they slept, and photos and so all of those things. That's the only app I have on my phone which actually has the push enabled. So I would say definitely that's the best. Usually the best push messages I'm getting during the day is photos from the nursery. So that's mine.
So you have a camera set up in there. And just a bit of housekeeping before we dive into the discussion. It's going to be a bit of an intense conversation today, so we're going to keep questions to the end. There's a Slido link somewhere, so submit your questions to Slido, and we'll leave time at the end for all of that. Here is the Slido link. So also, if we don't get to your question, obviously come and find any of us at the end. We're fairly friendly. So you can come and ask us at any time. So without further ado, Moshe, I'm going to go straight back to you, since you're next to me. How do you think customer needs and behaviors have evolved and are changing in general, but especially over the last 12 months? What have you been seeing?
Yeah, I think the main difference we've seen over the last 12 months, and we also expect to see in the next 12 months, is everything which is related to privacy. I think it started, I think it was iOS 14.5, where really like the changes in privacy meant that it's just much harder to acquire customers, track customers between different apps. And it just, I think for us, it just emphasizes that, you know, the importance of retention. And well, I think even 5, 6, 7 years ago, people talked about the fact that, you know, acquiring a new customer is probably 5 times more expensive than retaining an existing one. I think now it becomes 10 or even 15 times harder and more expensive. So we see that like the trend is going that way, and I think it means for everyone who is, you know, especially for apps that have lots of subscribers, lots of users, their customers, their main asset, and they need to really retain those customers because it will be just much harder to continue and acquire customers in the same pace.
Okay, I'm going to rinse your brain for that later on retention and how we're best going to acquire customers. But Tanya, have you seen anything different?
Yeah, definitely. We are consistently getting more orders on our app versus our website, which was not always the case. A few years ago, just before the lockdown, we actually got more orders on the website, but the behaviors are changing now. Also because there is an increasing preference for mobile-first platforms and apps, and those that especially focus on speed, on ease of use, and on providing services on demand. This can also be attributed to the growth of the on-demand economy, which is currently at more than $50 billion, and it's estimated to cross more than $300 billion in the next few years. Apart from that, the increasing awareness about the impact of technology on the environment has also led companies to focus more on sustainable practices, and this is also something that the users expect. For example, we have recently, in the last couple of years, rolled out electric bikes for our collections and deliveries, and they have like 0 carbon emissions, so they are quite sustainable, and they're also a very useful marketing tool.
So that leads us to, what are the main challenges, you know, that you're seeing with retention at the moment? Is there any way to overcome some of these challenges as well, Léa?
So I work with a lot of subscription apps, and the one thing that keeps coming back, and I've seen, you know, I heard of, is specifically for apps that are here to build a habit, and they usually have very long subscription periods. So they usually have at least a month, and very often is at least a year. On those products, if you wait for your user to churn to actually start trying to figure it out, why are they churning, and try to do something about it, it's too late. You know, there's an entire year that passed, and it's very, very, very low down the funnel. So that's a problem that keeps coming back and back over and over again. And the one thing that I've seen that works quite well is if you focus on shortening those feedback loop and finding a way where you can use your user behavior and your data very early on to predict churn. So, I mean, a lot of you are familiar with, you know, things like North Star metric and that kind of concept is basically using the same principle, but for churn. So an example of that is you could do an analysis, and one of the products I work on, actually, they did an analysis and found out that within the first 5 days of a user subscribing, that's where over 80% of the cancellation were happening within those first 5 days. That doesn't tell you why people are unsubscribing, but it gives you a very specific point in time where you can focus on, where you actually can set hypotheses, test, get this really quick feedback loop, really quick results. And also if you have to reach out to people to actually talk to them and get insights, you know when to get that in them funnel. And then you just take those, put them in cohort, and based on the cohort behavior, you can start actually impacting that long-term retention with those early indicators.
Perfect. I mean, it is interesting to think about the majority of these cancellations happen in the first 5 days. Actually, the majority of your free trials, if you have a free trial on your app, will happen in the first 1 to 2 minutes of someone downloading the app. So, a lot of the concentration is always in these first couple of minutes of the product, and it's really important for us to, also think beyond those first couple of minutes. So, Tanya, what are your biggest challenges with retention at the moment, specifically?
Well, from my experience, what we've seen at Laundry Heap is that the loyal users, those who use the app frequently, don't require a lot of retention tactics. The challenges basically come from the segments which are less active or inactive. For example, we have a lot of tourists, which form a significant proportion of our audience, and they would probably visit one of our service areas once in a few months or maybe a few times in a year because we operate globally. So the challenge actually comes from finding the balance between under-communication and over-communication with this particular segment. So I would say the step 1 is easy, to identify these segments. Step 2 is to actually figure out the most effective channel of communication with them. From what I've seen, it's generally emails or push notifications. They have very high response rates. But the actual challenge literally is finding the balance between spamming people, because that leads to a lot of unsubscribe requests, which beats the purpose, or not sending them enough messages, which leads to them forgetting about the brand and service altogether when they do require it.
I mean, we've been touching on churn here, and when we were preparing for this conversation, Moshe was talking to us about churn factor, and that's something that they have within Optimove. And I'd love you to share a bit more about what that churn factor is, and what you do specifically to fight churn.
Yeah, for sure. I think that there's some great questions over just in front of me. So I saw a question about products with low frequency, which is exactly that. So someone asked about Airbnb, which is usually low frequency. So how do you deal with that? I think it's spot on. Talks about churn factor, because usually what happens is that the subscribers or the user of the app are very different. So some of them are engaged on a monthly basis, other once a quarter, sometimes it's a weekly or daily basis. So, and still what we see when we start to work with a new client is that most of the definition of an active versus churn customers are rule-based, and usually 30 days of inactivity, you are bucketed as a churn customer, where really maybe you are engaged on a quarterly basis, so you are not there yet. So we look at basically the average frequency of every customer versus the time it has been since they were last engaged. And the ratio over there is basically something we call the churn factor. So if your churn factor is lower than 1, it means that you are still not in the red zone. Yeah. And once it goes up, then we are starting to apply different tactics. Essentially, it means that we are targeting each one of the customers individually. And we are not necessarily freaking out because it's been, 2 weeks or 3 weeks that someone, hasn't visited the app or even used the service.
Because they all have their own frequency cycle.
Exactly.
And I've seen this in other companies as well. I worked at a nightlife app previously where you got free drinks. And our average frequency cycle for someone to reach hard active, which was making 3 redemptions on different days, was 21 days. So it took on average 21 days for someone to redeem 3 free drinks. But some of the users, had that frequency cycle of 90 days. Yeah. And so it's unfair to compare these people who have a 90-day cycle as saying that they're churned when, no, they just only go for a drink once a month instead.
Yeah, definitely. We often, one last thing I would say about that is one thing we used to see that is happening quite a bit is that customers we used to call them the zigzag customers, jumping from active to churn, And one of the reasons it happens because brands were just sending them promotions before they actually churn, and then they would use the promotions and go back and forth between churn and active. So we kind of try to prevent that.
It's a big lack of understanding of what actually activation is and actually what churn is itself. Léa, I know you've got some thoughts on this one.
Yeah, we actually talked about frequency quite a lot, didn't we? It's very fascinating when you dig into it and really be able to cohort users in very specific way. You wanted solution, right?
Yeah, what have
Yeah.
you done to combat retention? I know you've got something very
Yeah,
exciting to share right now.
It's a bit different. I'm changing the subject, but we had a project a couple of years ago that was really cool, and essentially what we did was integrating new technology at the time, which was the ancestor of ChatGPT, which was GTP3, into our system. And the reason we did that is because we realized that the people were consuming very different content on the app, and they had different suggestion as should they be able to see next. And we were in a place where, we can create thousands of different notifications on email with different messages for everybody to make sure that the communication is personalized, that it's contextual, that we actually bring value to the user. Mm-hmm. That requires, I don't know, but I guess a lot of people, right?
Well, can you give an example of what that might have looked like?
Yeah, so what, basically we do that with GP3, and what happened is if you're a person that, for example, read Start With Why, let's say you bookmark it, you saved it, and you haven't read it, we were able to then send you a notification to remind you about it. But that notification, instead of saying something like, click here to watch your next book, to read your next book, it would actually have a text that comes directly from an insight from the book. So there was something very specific that the user would relate to because they show interest. And it was useful. It was actually a really useful piece of information to engage with. And that was really successful. It worked really well. It helped to increase engagement, which led to increase in retention and a reduction in churn. And it also brought value to the users, and it was done in a way where we could scale it without having to scale, our team or tech.
Copywriters.
Yeah, exactly, which is very important when you have a small team, which I think a lot of you have, having to be efficient about things.
And it's really helpful for the variable reward side of things as well. Like by using GPT-3 at Uptime, they were able to, send, let's say for their streak notifications, it was instead of having like unique streak notifications that had been written out individually, that the robots had, written all of these for them and were sending them out, on an ongoing basis. So everyone would always receive different notifications. Tanya?
Yeah, well, I agree with Léa really, and I do believe that it's important to tailor the messaging, to recognize the touch points. Like I said, the GDPR practices are important. We do focus on them a lot. We have 24/7 live chat support to address the queries of the customers. They can get in touch anytime. We help them with their data retrieval and deletion requests. And it's important to stay in touch, provide the customers with touch points on, say, social media, on the app, on their fingertips, literally. So anytime there is a question that comes up, they have access to us anytime, anywhere, any day.
How did you get to the point where you had 24/7 live chat support? That's very unachievable for a lot of companies at the moment.
Yeah, well, it was actually a natural progression from our expansion, really, because as we expanded into more and more countries, they all operate on different timelines in different time zones, and we realized we do need round-the-clock customer support, logistics support, to cater to the orders in all of those different countries. And that's how we came about this whole setup. And it's actually very useful. It provides a lot of support to the customer, and it builds a lot of trust with them too.
Have you been thinking about integrating ChatGPT for any of your support at the moment? I know that Intercom, for example, have just integrated with that.
We actually have. We have been working on a help resolution center, which is powered by AI to deal with the routine queries that come through. And if there's not a suitable solution for someone, they can always talk to someone, a live person on the other end at any point.
Yeah, privacy. I know you touched on privacy a second ago, Tanya. That's, a massive topic for everybody at the moment, yes. Especially since May 2021, that fateful day. But what are you doing at optimove to build trust and to keep that trust with with your customers whilst you're still managing to maintain personalization? What's that like for you? You know, are you a proponent of ATT? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we like, everything we talked about privacy makes it a little bit harder, and I think it just makes the campaign measurement more important than ever. We really try to, you know, prevent overspamming the customer, because, you know, what we always, you know, say to our partners is that, you know, that like there are two outcomes to every campaign you are sending. Like it's not about making money or not making money, it's about making money or losing money. Because if at the end of the day you annoy them and they opt out, it's a problem. It will be very hard to, you know, convince them to download the app again, and sometimes you won't be able to do it because they opted out completely. So balancing this traffic control and making sure that you are actually, you know, finding this sweet balance of, you know, keeping them intrigued and interested versus annoying them, that's what we are trying to do. Usually we're trying to start very, very low and figure out what's going on. And I think, you know, the question about Airbnb, again, going back to it, is think about, you know, most of the platforms we use, there's so much content you can share with the customers. It's not always about, you know, just, you know, asking them to buy our product or book another stay or book another trip. It's just about keeping them engaged. And I think, unfortunately, lots of brands are not really able to send interesting content that is keeping their customers engaged.
And,
even something like Airbnb, think about, like, they have such an amazing content and asset, and at least I don't get it. Maybe they're doing it for others, I'm not sure. But so that's probably the most important thing.
What would you do if you were Airbnb?
Well, I would definitely, I think, you know, I would definitely focus on content, which is related to travel, which is related to home, which is related to, you know, design, and just, you know, focus on keeping customer engaged rather than bookings. I think I know it's difficult, like it's very hard to people because engagement is a leading indicator for revenue, and usually the North Star for most businesses, especially if they are backed and they want to report revenue, it's revenue. But we always see that, you know, if you bring people to the app, if you bring people to your website, if they just visit, even if they haven't purchased, their lifetime value, you know, goes up, and then eventually some of them will purchase. It's a long-term play, so I think that's the right way to do it.
I love that, you know, it's not a case of winning, like making money, it's a case of making money or losing money.
Yeah.
You're going to lose your customers if you annoy them too much. One thing that you touched on earlier, Léa, was getting feedback from the customers, and I know I have my own methods of getting feedback from customers. That sounded a bit sinister, but what do you do specifically? And that's an open question for everyone after Léa, but what do you do? You know, I know that last year, actually, on this very stage, you gave a talk about using user-centric approaches to building your product. Like, what's that flow like for you? And also, how do you incorporate that feedback and that data into your company culture, if you're able to do that at all?
Great question, Hannah. Thank you. I'm a very big believer in democratizing user insights. It's something I live by. I'm a bit annoying about that, I think. I genuinely feel like whoever you are in a company, it doesn't matter what your job is, what your responsibility is, you need to have that touch point with your end user. You need to understand their pain, their goals, their expectation. It's really not about your product, it's about them and what can you deliver for them. And I don't really see how anyone can do their job if they don't understand that. I think it's essential. So our job is to make sure that everybody in the team have access to that by democratizing those insights. And to do that, there's basically three things. First is collect the insights. And the first part of that is make it very, very easy for people to provide you with insights. I see a lot of apps where you have to go down 3 levels of clicking through to actually contact the team. Why? Why would you do that? Why would you not make it so easy that actually there's touch points throughout your product, through your marketing, through your communication channel, like your email? Why would you have an email that's do not reply? what's the benefit for you as a company versus actually having somebody just pressing reply and sending you feedback, actual insight that could be very valuable for you. So first point, make it super easy for people to send you feedback. Second point is be proactive about it. Actually go and get those user feedback. Some teams here, you're really lucky, maybe you have this whole department, the research team. I didn't have that in most businesses. So you had to train yourself on how to conduct interview, how to do job to be done properly, how to do user testing properly, and just go out there and do it. One of the team I work with at the moment, actually, they're very interesting. They know that their core audience are students. And it's easy to access students. You know where they are. So those guys is actually one of the founders. He goes every Friday to universities, and he just talks to students. He asks them questions, he shows his product, he just gathers feedback. And I think that's essential, that actually really direct what product they're building and how successful they are. And so the last part of that was about democratizing the insights. And again, it comes back to make it easy. So everything in one place. It doesn't have to be fancy. You don't need a system. It can be, a Slack channel. It can be a folder on Google. It doesn't need to be something, very fancy. It just needs to be in one place that everyone has access to, that there's no password, there's no, very transparent, make sure everybody have access to it, and encourage people to go and access it. Encourage your team to once a week look at your store review and maybe answer them. To go once a week and look at those insights that we receive and the complaint and think about it and just discuss them. And it's not super complicated to do. It's just something that somehow is never a priority, but it's actually super important. Yeah.
I love that you were mentioning jobs to be done there. I am always going on and on and on about this theory, jobs to be done. And if you haven't heard of that theory before and that framework, I would recommend looking into it. There's a lot of amazing material on there. Also on Medium, there's a lot of amazing material on there that you can get for free. And a big part of that is understanding the why of why are people using your product. So why are they coming in? What were they expecting to happen when they downloaded it? What are they expecting to be able to achieve? What have they tried instead? And understanding, all of these whys, but also who they are and what makes them tick. And not only will this help you with your product, but it will help you with all of your messaging. So, the articulation that they're using is the way that you should be articulating things back to your customers. Tanya, I know, you're working a lot on this as well. How is that going for you? How are you bringing all of this information into your company?
Like Léa mentioned, it's very important to make it easy for people to give feedback, provide feedback. And most people want to share their experiences very easily, but what we've seen is that they're more probable, they'll probably provide more feedback after their first experience of using the product or the service. So that's an optimal time to send them some questions about how they found the service, how the experience was there something that they wish they could see, some features they could see. But that alone is not enough. We also need to have some human interactions with them, because then you can really dig deep into what they're looking for, what their pain points are, and what the solutions are. And sometimes this also uncovers some surprising insights or some cultural nuances that we may have missed, especially if we're operating across multiple countries or multiple markets with different cultures. For example, we have regular focus groups with different segments of our audience. It's an ongoing exercise. What we noticed was that in the UK, one of our USPs is the free collection and delivery and the quick turnaround. However, in the US, it's a standard service offered by all of the high street dry cleaners and laundry shops. So we don't really stand out in that market, but we probably would have missed this point if we hadn't really interacted with our audience in the US. So based on the insights, you can tailor your messaging, you can tailor the communication, so it's really helpful.
And when you're running your focus groups, are they in person or are they online? How do you recruit people for those?
So it depends. If some people cannot make it, we do have people based in most of the markets we operate in. So there are some in-person focus groups. But then if people cannot make it, or it is more convenient to actually have an online focus group, we go with that as well. So we have both models.
Do you see any difference in the dynamics between being online and being in person? Like, how do they go?
Well, what we've seen is that in person, you are able to have deeper conversations, you can connect more with the people, and then it also leads to other conversations about cultures or their daily habits, which can give you some clues into how to tailor your messaging, which may not come up in a virtual call.
Moshe, do you have anything you want to tell the room about how you get your user feedback?
I think, I mean, I think you covered it pretty well. I would just say that, you know, what we've seen that is probably working best is rather than sending those long surveys, which, you know, usually they are sent in over an email, and then unless you have a very, like you have a massive database, then it's hard to really get conclusions from the survey. You wanna try and ask like simple questions, and that the response will be quick. So you can do it in an email, right, with like, you know, a creative template, which, you know, you just click a button or two, and then the data is sent back, or obviously within the app. So try to make sure it's simple, it's quick, otherwise people won't engage with it.
Yeah, I think in the app as well is a really underrated channel for getting some of this feedback. With one company I'm working with at the moment, we weren't sure about how our notifications were going, so we did a modal pop-up, just a small modal for every person who opened the app. You know, how are you finding our notifications? And then people could select whether they were receiving them, if they were finding value, and then there was just a free text on the next screen, and the content that we were getting through from that, like straight again into a Slack channel, was super valuable, and has allowed us to actually tailor like a lot of the flow and everything for like 10 minutes worth of work, you know. I mean, we're getting towards the end. I know that we've got a couple of questions here, but I encourage anyone to submit any more questions at slido.com. But I want to finish, you know, my questions at least looking forward. So what's one prediction that you have for the future of mobile apps and how we interact with them specifically? And what can we do to start preparing for that future today? So I'll start with Tanya.
Well, we've seen that people are increasingly using voice searches, voice commands, using more of Siri, devices like Alexa. I do believe in the near future, maybe a few years down the line, these features would be integrated into the apps which are offered to the masses at scale. It would be a good idea to have a plan of action ready for when the time comes. You don't exactly know how the market is going to move, but just to set aside some budget or keep in mind the timelines for developing, coding, integrating these features, so that when the time comes, you're not starting from scratch, you're a bit ahead of the others.
What does your plan of action look like at the moment? Do you have one in-house at the moment?
Not at the moment, but it is definitely under consideration.
Léa, what's your piece of advice?
I don't know if it's here to stay or if it's a bit of a fad, but at the moment I'm seeing popping everywhere those AI/deepfake avatar, you know? I've seen them being used for friendship, for dating, for coaching. They just seem to be popping up everywhere. Some of them are really nicely done. Some are just questionable. But I'm really wondering if this is going to become more of a trend where it's not a product that's about that, but that's just one functionality and one feature of any other product, where you have, I don't know, like a virtual assistant talking to you that actually look like a person, talk like a person, is smart like a person.
Yeah. I think, you know,
Scary.
it is pretty scary. I've been seeing recently as well, you know, all of this, that you can get like AI avatars to be your brand influencer now as well, which, you know, hell is that 2 years ago? That was pretty crazy. But yeah, I think AI, everyone's rushing at the moment to build apps on top of GPT-4. I don't think that's going anywhere. I think that's just going to get better and better and faster and faster. I'm already a subscriber, I'm a hard active chat GPT subscriber.
What do you ask him?
What do to tell me my dreams. And Moshe, I know you've got something interesting to share here.
Yeah, I think also, for me, I think the generative AI piece is definitely up there. I feel like, and I don't even think about like the scale, like the spooky stuff we talked about. I think even basic things like, I want to open my Deliveroo and just tell Deliveroo, like, just get me the pizza I usually get with the toppings I usually get from the place I usually get it, and I want it at 6:30. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I think probably most apps will need this type of, bots, and we'll definitely see more of them. And I also feel like, in a way, I'm thinking whether it kind of makes the fact that you have so many apps on your machine a bit redundant, because maybe then you could just ask your phone to do it and it will select the app it needs to select, and that's it. So,
it's starting to do that. I think in maybe 2017 probably is when Apple started nudging us about including more Siri functionality and getting all of this voice assistant functionality in place and everything. So, on Alexa, I still have to say, play this on Spotify, but I don't know if that's going to even be more streamlined soon. What do you think?
Yeah, it's. I think it will. I think there is a commercial aspect to it. Probably, I'm not sure how. The big tech companies, they have monopoly. They are controlling advertising, controlling a lot of things. So I won't be surprised if they will control it. And Apple, if you ask them to play a song, why would they open Spotify, right? They have Apple Music, and if you have it on your phone, maybe your free trial will start then. I don't know. But I definitely see it going to this direction for sure.
Voice-activated free trial.
Voice-activated free trial.
Yeah.
Well, you've seen probably on the news at one point, they said there are commands like, Alexa, buy some batteries. And then thousands of people who were watching all had these batteries ordered from Amazon and shipped to them. We've finished our questions now, and we're going to go into some audience questions. But before we do, please could we have a round of applause for our amazing panelists? Okay, so open question to all of you. How do you strike the balance between too many pushes and too few? And can you measure push unsubscribe? Please.
I think the only thing you can do is test everything, A/B test everything. In this case, what you can do is identify one segment and then divide it up into clusters and test out different frequencies and content that you send out to those clusters. You can try a campaign with maybe 4 push notifications in a gap of a week. And then you could also have another campaign sending out maybe 2 push notifications. Thing is, you cannot assume anything. You have to test out everything on the segments themselves, and then you analyze the data, and you see the conversion rates, you see the response rates, and based on that, you can actually formulate a strategy, a communication strategy.
Are you testing with incrementality at the moment? And how are you doing that? Could you tell everyone?
So we have continuous testing in place for literally everything, all communication points, all data points. We do have a customer research team in place who actually undertake the testing. And we sort of supply the parameters, we tell them what we want to test out and how it would help us in the strategy moving forward, and then they do the needful. And what we've seen is that it's not enough to just perform a test once, because as we've seen, user behavior keeps changing. So it's always a good idea to repeat these tests every few months or even every year. And more often than not, you do get different results than the previous time, even if it's the same segment and you're testing similar parameters.
What do you do if you have different results?
you just modify your strategy and adapt to the changing environment.
And you test again.
Test again. So I think maybe Léa will be well fitted to answer this one, but how do you successfully land the prioritization of engagement and retention for growth in a company that is focused on output and feature delivery? It's a big one.
Change company. I mean, that's very challenging, you know. Growth is, like Hannah loved to say that, growth is a mindset. It's no, you know, there's no pure framework. There's so many frameworks that fit growth. There's so many ways to prioritize things that work with that. But if your company is entirely focused on feature delivery, there's very little you can do as an individual. You really have to get everybody on board with changing their mindset. So educating internally, sharing case studies, sharing knowledge from other places, just, I don't know, subscribe all of your leadership team to Lenny's newsletter or something like that. Just keep pushing and pushing to put those ways of working and thinking in front of people, so you can actually get into a place where you can do at least one test. And if you choose that test carefully, you choose a test that, you know, you have a strong hypothesis, you have really good knowledge about it, you know it will impact one of the core KPI of your business, you can run that test, get really good results, and that really helps with an adoption. And once you have that, then you can go ahead and change your entire strategy and start changing the way you work and the mentality. But this is it's a journey. It really is a journey when you really focus constantly on feature delivery. It's a 360-way change on how you're working. It's no, come and talk to me after. It's a long subject.
Yeah, I love the educate from the inside approach as well. I've definitely worked in companies before which have been, you know, focused on feature delivery rather than, you know, the growth as a mindset, growth as, you know, experimentation before. And what I did was I literally sat down with a presentation with our designer, and then I sat down with a presentation with our CTO, and then I sat down with a presentation with every other kind of key stakeholder until they fully understood it. And then they were like, oh, why aren't we doing this? And then we all started operating like that. And then the founders were eventually like, oh, now we're doing something completely different. But it takes a lot of time and patience to be able to do that as well, because you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So it might be, as Léa says, the case to just find another company. I won the battle. Steve won. Steve won. The dad joke battle this time. I won the last one. Do you make how do you differentiate between retention and win-backs? Is there a difference there, Moshe?
I mean, we look at retention, like retention for us is basically focusing on active customers who haven't churned, and win back is reactivation. So I think this is the differentiation for us. And we do, you know, we usually kind of split the funnel into 4, where more, or 5, or more, most companies will look at, you know, registered only customers, new customers, customers who like paid or subscribe, active churn. We usually add another life cycle stage or bucket, we call it reactivated. Because what happens is when you start to work on those, so obviously the retention piece is to prevent customers from moving to churn. Once they move to churn, obviously, you know, it's harder to bring them back. But usually once you reactivated them, and I think there was a question about like people who churned a while ago versus people who recently churned. Obviously there's a difference there. But usually what happens is that those customers, it's been so long since they engage with a brand that they are, in a way, they are reborn. So we want to treat them as new customers because we see that 70% of customers will reactivate churn again. So this is our approach. It's obviously, it's like, you can look at it as the same thing, right? Like, but this is the differentiation we do.
And we've got 1 minute left, and I know Léa probably has something she'd like to add to that. Like,
yeah, I very much agree with what you said. We've treated reactivated customers as new user over and over again on apps, and it works really well. I genuinely feel like us as, you know, apps people, we have a lot of perception of how people see your product, which is not accurate. I think people don't necessarily remember your product. You're not top of their mind. So when they come back after a few months maybe or a few weeks, they might not even remember that they used your product a few weeks ago. And if they do, they don't necessarily remember how or why they stopped using it. So we treat them as new user. We really get them the best out of the product first, make sure that they get the best the best content, like all the engagement tactics that you do very early on to activate people. We redo all of that with reactivated users, and it worked quite well.
Amazing. Tanya, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Léa and Moshe have said. I guess it also depends on the audiences which are relevant to a particular product or service. For example, retention may apply to all of the audience segments, but win-back may apply to just some segments who have maybe used your service once, maybe a couple of years ago, and they've probably forgotten they even have the app on their phone. So it's just about reactivating them. So I would look at it as a reactivation versus retention.
Thank you. That's all we've got time for, folks. So another round of applause from our panelists. Thank you, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.